It's easier without you. I'm cutting ties with you. I never imagined I'd hear those words tonight, on Thanksgiving. Standing in the cold air outside the front door, I could feel the warmth of the apple pecan crumble pie slowly leaving my fingertips. Standing before me was my mother, Claire Robinson. She was wearing a deep crimson satin blouse and pearl earrings. Her appearance was flawless, and the contrast between that and her cutting words made my brain spin in confusion. What did you just say?" I barely managed to ask. My voice was more hoarse than I expected. "Don't make me repeat myself. It's Thanksgiving. We all want to enjoy ourselves. When you show up, the mood turns heavy." She spoke as if I were some kind of difficult customer. "But I baked the pie again this year. Just like always." My voice trailed off. Before I realized it, my sister Haley appeared behind her, holding a wine glass and watching us. "Mom, I told you. You should have said no this year. Chloe doesn't know her place. She just makes things awkward for everyone." "My place?" I instinctively echoed her words, and Haley gave a slight shrug. "At work and at home, you're background support. You know that, right? You're not the star. So showing up and throwing off the atmosphere is honestly a nuisance." The world in front of me crumbled with a deafening crash. This past week, I had spent every free moment reviewing pie recipes, shopping for ingredients, and wrestling with the oven late into the night. It wasn't out of obligation or a need for approval. I simply wanted to get a little closer to the family circle. "I understand." When I finally said those words, I was surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "I'll just leave this here." I gently released the pie box from my hands and placed it beside a terracotta pot near the entrance. "Eat it if you feel like it." I said, "We don't want it." My mother's shouting voice came from behind. But I no longer felt any emotion stirred by it. If anything, I sensed desperation behind her blade-like tone. Without turning around, I stepped away from the entrance and began to walk. At that moment, my father Jason appeared from inside the house. I thought our eyes might meet, but he said nothing, wore no expression, and turned away without a word, disappearing behind the door. I was really invisible in this house. Once back in the car, I sank into the seat and suddenly felt the weight of my body. My fingertips were cold, and gripping the steering wheel felt a bit painful. When I opened my phone screen, a message notification was glowing. "Are you still there? I want some pie. Come to my place tonight." The kindness in that message made my eyes well up unexpectedly. My grandmother had declined to attend this year's Thanksgiving, saying she wasn't feeling well. But I knew the truth. She was just exhausted from the conflict with my mother. And I'm sure she understood what kind of position I held in that house. That's why she chose not to force herself to be there, not to intervene, and to keep her distance. But she and I had connected through a location-sharing app. Seeing that I hadn't moved for a while in front of the house, she must have sensed something was wrong. Through the screen, it felt like I could hear her warm voice. She's the one person who gives me a place where I can simply be myself. At both the company and at home, there was no one who understood my abilities more accurately. I looked once more in the rearview mirror at the entrance of the Robinson house. The wreath hanging on the white pillars, the glittering lanterns, the laughter spilling from inside. None of it belonged to me. I no longer had to look back. As I shifted into reverse and began to drive away, I murmured softly, "Thank you, Mom, for waking me up." There was no sarcasm or anger in those words. Only one thing remained: a quiet resolve. As I drove, I stared blankly at the city lights swaying beyond the windshield. On Thanksgiving night, everything seemed to glow with happiness. Lights spilling from house windows, wreaths hung in the yards, the smell of turkey in the air. None of it felt connected to me today. "It's easier without you. I'm cutting ties with you." The words my mother spoke at the front door still echoed dully in my mind. And yet, strangely, no tears came. If anything, I felt as if the heavy chains that had bound me for so long had finally broken with a loud snap. Having lived as a member of the Robinson family, I realized now that I had long since begun to doubt what the word family even meant. The first time I started going to the company was when I was in college. After my evening classes, I would head over in my campus jacket to the small back office reserved for employees behind Mitchell Systems, the company my mother ran. There was only a dusty, poorly air-conditioned, windowless meeting room, but that was my very first workplace. Today, I need you to clean up this customer data. Be careful, duplicates lead to complaints. I nodded to my mother's calm instructions and turned silently to the computer. Without anyone teaching me, I opened massive spreadsheets and reviewed them row by row with care. It didn't take me long to learn the Excel formulas. I felt a small sense of accomplishment in finding inconsistencies in data and correcting them with precision. But I can hardly recall ever being thanked or praised for my work. With no reward, I would just be told, "It's all yours," and immediately handed the next task. Before long, I developed the habit of spotting and fixing anomalies before anyone asked. Signs of errors, tiny shifts in numbers, strange timestamps. I think I had unconsciously sharpened my instincts behind the scenes. By the time I was a sophomore, I was handling monthly payroll, and by junior year, I was involved in designing system test protocols. To my own surprise, I had come to understand the structure of internal systems and the flow of finances more than anyone else. But that was because my mother had deliberately assigned me those tasks. Let Haley handle the glamour of sales. You've got the numbers. My mother's tone was always dry and matter-of-fact. She neither praised nor scolded me. She only stated what was necessary for the business. Still, somewhere inside, I wanted to believe there was the tiniest shred of expectation buried in her mechanical voice. Even after graduating college and joining the company officially, my duties didn't change. In fact, they deepened as I became more involved in the core operations. Financial analysis, cloud server security, vendor contract audits, coordination with our accountant Melissa. If I hadn't been involved, the finances, systems, and daily operations would have stalled countless times. From editing contract language to configuring security settings to adjusting figures before closing the books, I knew the work better than anyone and held the field together. But my mother never acknowledged that contribution and always put my sister on center stage. She was introduced as the future successor, spoke at meetings as if it were natural, and was involved in major decisions. Meanwhile, I was invisible even in meetings, not given a single chance to speak. A silent, convenient presence who simply followed orders. That was how I was treated, as if my non-existence had been assumed from the very beginning. People who are best suited to work behind the scenes shouldn't stand out too much. That was one of my mother's favorite sayings. I never rejected it. Because I had no reason to reject it. I genuinely cared about my mother's company. That's why I wanted to believe it was my place. Even if I wasn't praised or recognized, I convinced myself that functioning properly was meaningful. The only person who ever said she truly saw me was my grandmother, Emily. "Chloe, you are the backbone of this company. It's not about glamour. No building can stand without its spine." Even after retiring from the company, my grandmother would occasionally visit the department where I worked, quietly watching over me as I busily moved my hands. She always brought the same kind of coffee with a familiar aroma. Through the lid of that paper cup, that small moment of relief softened my heart in ways I could never express in words. The words that came from my grandmother's mouth carried trust, not control or command. Her gaze recognized not my performance or numbers, but my very existence. "As long as you're here, everything will be fine." Each time she smiled and said that, I felt as if I had confirmed my place. For someone like me, overwhelmed by duties and without the time or space to raise my voice, her presence was like a lighthouse. A calm, unwavering light that never disappeared, even on stormy days. Before I completely fell apart, there was someone who reached out to me without a word. And that person saw me not as a convenient family member, but as a grown woman. That truth alone was my greatest salvation. I had devoted over a decade to the company, but when I finally paused, I realized something. No one had ever asked what I wanted. Chloe, can you take care of this? Sorry, but you're the only one who understands this. It's just behind the scenes stuff anyway, right? Those countless words piled on top of each other as if painting over my outline until it disappeared. That's why, tonight, my mother's words. It's easier without you. I'm cutting ties with you. They were a declaration that I didn't exist. But at the same time, they were a declaration of freedom to start from zero. I realized I could listen to my own voice without the burden of the company, my mother's gaze, or anyone's expectations. And now I'm heading to my grandmother's house, to the one person who truly sees me. I haven't completely let go of everything yet. There's still frustration and pain lingering deep inside. But I'm not looking back anymore. That Thanksgiving night at my grandmother's home was quieter and more peaceful than any holiday before. There were no extravagant dishes, no grand toasts. Only a small extra pie I had brought, placed in the center of the table, and a pot of tea my grandmother had brewed. In front of the lit fireplace, Grandma sat beside me, holding an old piece of knitting. She didn't ask me anything, didn't rush me, just quietly stayed by my side. And that silence was comforting. When I took the first bite of pie, she started to speak. This is your flavor. No one noticed it in that house. But I always knew. Just those words made me feel like I could finally breathe deeply. The next morning, when I woke up, I felt a kind of energy returning from deep within my body, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I couldn't remember the last time I wanted to do something not for someone else, but for myself. But that peace didn't last long. A few days after returning from my grandmother's house, I received an email from my mother. The subject read, "Urgent, contract review for new project." The attached PDF included a business plan for AI solution development and a $2.8 million bank loan agreement. My name had already been listed as a co-signer on the contract. Shocked and uncomfortable, I contacted my mother, and she responded as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Chloe, you're the only one. This loan didn't go through with Haley's credit score. And I can't take risks with my personal guarantee anymore. You have an MBA and a perfect credit history. The bank said they'd approve it if it's under your name." Her tone was calm, as if the fact that my name was on the document wasn't a problem at all. "I wasn't told anything about this. Using my name without my consent is unacceptable." "I didn't use it. You haven't officially signed anything yet, right? I just shared the contract beforehand. Besides, you're part of this company, so it's only natural for you to take responsibility and be involved." That word natural hit me with a dull ache. How much have I already sacrificed in the name of responsibility and contribution? This whole project is too sudden to begin with. I haven't even been given a proper explanation. That can come later. What we need right now is your credit to finalize the deal. There was a trace of urgency in her voice. She was probably running out of time. But the way she treated my name as a substitute for collateral filled me with a quiet anger. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair, unable to move for a while. But I couldn't act on emotion. I had to stay calm. First, I needed to confirm the facts. With that in mind, I opened the company's usual cloud-based management tools. The first thing that struck me was a strange sense of restricted access. Sections of the server and folders related to the project, which I had previously accessed freely, were now locked. When I asked the department administrator, I was told that there had been a system permissions review, but I had received no notification or explanation. A few days later, I also stopped receiving invites to the regular management meetings. When I checked the schedule just in case, only that specific meeting had been erased from the calendar I had always used. The distrust grew, but even so, I kept reviewing expense data and transaction records within the limits I could access. And then, in one ledger entry, I saw something that made me doubt my own eyes. An improper expenditure of over $50,000 in delinquency records on the loan were listed. Several transactions had been processed under marketing expenses, but the actual content was hardly legitimate. Moreover, the payment history related to the $2.8 million loan showed overdue entries, and the reason for the delays was vaguely written in the remarks section. When I investigated the vendors involved, the names were unfamiliar and the transaction history was shallow. Just in case, I compiled all relevant documents and saved backups. That afternoon, I reached out informally to our accountant, Melissa, asking her to look into the background of the spending as much as she could. 2 days later, she got back to me with even more shocking information. That vendor was a shell company with no real operations, and the registered address matched one of Haley's personal investment properties. In other words, they had funneled company funds through fake consulting fees into their own affiliated company. My whole body went numb. It wasn't anger, it was more like a quiet coldness rising inside me. My name had been used, without permission, as the official signee in that financial process. How could something like this happen? How had I not seen it sooner? As I traced the contract documents further, even more serious facts began to emerge. Those contracts had my signature attached as a scanned image. The date was from the same week I had been busy preparing for Thanksgiving. I had never been informed about the contract. At first, I wanted to believe it was some sort of mistake. But the signature line clearly displayed the printed name Chloe Mitchell with an image of my signature pasted beside it. Furthermore, the ledger contained records about the $2.8 million loan progress, filled with negotiation details I had never been involved in, along with overdue remarks. Everything had been conducted under my name. While I was staying late at night organizing the company books, someone else had been pasting my signature and submitting fraudulent applications. My credit and my future had been used as collateral behind my back. I was being exploited. Not with respect or gratitude, but as a cold numerical asset for convenience. That time when my mother said, "You're the only one," her words didn't carry a trace of trust or expectation. All she did was use my existence as a convenient credit tool to avoid personal responsibility and protect the family name and company brand. What was sacrificed were the integrity I had built up over the years, my options for the future, and above all, my small hope of believing in my family. Without thinking, I called my grandmother. The moment she heard my voice, it was as if she understood everything. Grandma was once the founder of Mitchell Systems, the president before my mother took over. She had seen both the bright and the dark sides of management battles and betrayals alike. Maybe that's why she immediately sensed the crisis hiding behind the tremble in my voice and spoke with a quiet calm, without even a moment to gasp. "Stay calm, Chloe. This is a situation where only those who've noticed it can act, and you have that strength. Don't panic. If you're going to move, do it quietly and deliberately. First, remove your name from all loan contracts. That's your top priority." In her voice was a steady weight and unwavering conviction, something only someone who had built a company and overcome irreparable crises could possess. With her words pushing gently against my back, I turned to my desk and began saving the evidence. First, I moved the documents that proved the forged signature into a separate folder and saved backups on an external drive. Next, I traced all documents signed under my name over the past year, checking for similar patterns. Some contracts clearly didn't match my usual formatting. Wording, phrasing, layout. All signs that someone had tried to imitate my style. I had never been trusted. I had only been used. Then I contacted Aubrey, a lawyer, and began preparing an official notice that the contract documents contained fraudulent elements, that my signature had been used without my consent, and that my name was not to be used in any future loan agreements. Aubrey responded quickly, calmly, but thoroughly. She also began to restrict access to the company's IT systems and arranged for the necessary materials to be handed over to an independent auditor. In my hands, I held the necessary evidence and the track record I had built. When I reported this to my grandmother, she smiled slightly and said, "Finally, your life is about to begin." Maybe she was right. No, she was absolutely right. I had always worked in someone else's shadow, chasing numbers to prove my worth, offering unwavering loyalty. But now, for the first time, I was beginning to build a future under my own name. That $2.8 million loan, it no longer needed my signature. At last, I could finally recognize myself not as someone in the background, but as the protagonist. My grandmother's words glowed in my chest like a light. Not a spark, but a quiet, steady flame that illuminated the home. That's my way. And the people who had used my name without permission would come to understand what my quiet strength truly meant. A few days later, I visited the corporate division of our partner bank with all the prepared evidence in hand. Brandon, the loan officer in charge, was present at the meeting as I calmly explained the situation. What I presented were several contracts bearing my signature without permission, detailed records of over $50,000 in improper expenses, and documents linking a suspicious vendor to possible misappropriation. At first, Brandon looked doubtful, but as he reviewed the materials, his expression turned serious, and he nodded carefully. This is a serious matter. It affects the credibility of the loan. We'll launch an internal investigation immediately. I nodded quietly. This wasn't revenge. It was simply an act to correct the truth. I submitted copies of the required documents and a written statement and informed them that our legal counsel would be in touch regarding the next steps, including legal proceedings. After finishing everything, I let out a deep breath and left the building. From there, I headed straight to the company's headquarters. That afternoon, the same day I had submitted evidence to the bank, I stepped into the company's conference room for the first time in a long while. Inside the room, my mother and sister were already waiting. My mother had been reviewing some documents, but stopped when she saw me. "Chloe, what are you thinking? Did you really report this to the bank?" Haley spoke first. Her voice was tense, clearly irritated. "Why wouldn't I? False statements and forged signatures related to the $2.8 million loan and opaque fund transfers. I submitted them all as evidence." I took the copies from my bag and quietly placed them on the table. "These are copies of the contracts you proceeded with using my name. And here's the vendor agreement related to the $50,000 in improper spending. All of them have my signature attached, but I never gave my consent." My mother didn't move a muscle. But something flickered faintly in her eyes. "What are you making a fuss over something so minor? That minor thing can constitute financial fraud." The voice came slowly from the back of the room. Gentle but with unmistakable weight, it froze everyone in place for a moment. When I turned, I saw my grandmother standing at the door. She stood tall, with a well-kept outfit and a cane in her hand. Though her movements showed her age, her presence alone changed the atmosphere of the room. With her cane, she walked into the conference room slowly, but with steady steps. The surprising thing was, I hadn't even contacted her. Yet she had come, as if she already knew everything I was going through. "Grandma, I told you not to come." "You didn't have to. The moment I heard you finally stood up for yourself, I couldn't possibly stay silent." She smiled warmly and took the seat directly across from my mother. "Claire, do you remember what I told you? Never underestimate Chloe." My mother spoke without changing her expression. "This is business, Mother. Please don't interfere just because of family ties. This isn't about sentiment. It's about responsibility as a business leader. You used your own daughter as a legal tool, and you put the company's credibility at risk." Haley slammed her hand on the table in frustration. "Mom didn't do it. I arranged everything. And Chloe's been involved in loan matters plenty of times. We just got ahead of the process a little this time." "Got ahead?" I slowly looked at Haley. "You forged my signature, created false contracts, caused loan delays, and even made unauthorized expenditures of $50,000. And you call that a little? Don't say it like it's just business as usual." Just as Haley was at a loss for words, my mother interjected. "Chloe, I understand what you're trying to say. But everything was done to protect the company. What this company needed right now was someone who could deliver results immediately. Your credit was just a means to that end. So that makes it okay. That's how business works. You still don't understand that. No, I understand it perfectly. I looked straight at my mother. I'm not a tool for this company. I'm not a shadow. I'm not a convenient guarantor. From now on, I will use my name by my own will. Silence fell over the room. After a moment, my grandmother spoke. Chloe, you've said everything that needed to be said, haven't you? I nodded. The rest will proceed through legal channels. You'll be receiving a formal notice from my attorney. I intend to have my name removed from all loan agreements and clarify accountability for the forged signatures. Of course, this will also be reported to the board. You don't tell me. Are you recording this conversation? Haley turned pale as she raised her voice. No, there's no need. I already have all the evidence I need. I said this and placed the documents back into my bag. As I stood up, my grandmother also rose slowly to her feet. She looked only at my mother one last time. Claire, you may have thought Chloe was a useful child, but you never saw her as a trustworthy adult. That was your biggest mistake. My mother said nothing in return. She only pressed her lips into a faint line and watched us leave. The sound of the conference room door closing was strangely quiet. Out in the hallway, Grandma gently took my hand. You did well. Yeah, thank you. For the first time, I felt I could say those words from the bottom of my heart. From now on, what kind of place would I build? What kind of life would I live? I didn't know yet. But what I did know for certain was that I would no longer live in someone else's shadow. I would live under my own name. And now I have just taken the first step. 3 months later, I stood looking out over the city from the window of my new office. The suburbs of San Francisco. It was a small place I had chosen myself, something I never could have imagined back when I was buried in the ledgers of Mitchell Systems. The business I had just launched was a consulting firm aimed at supporting female entrepreneurs. It's still small in terms of name and achievements. But every face I met, every email I exchanged, none of it was under anyone else's shadow. It was all under my name. It was all work I had started by my own will. During the launch, my grandmother supported me every step of the way. Don't be afraid of the risks, you already have something built up. Just as she said, a few former clients who had trusted me personally reached out, and the first contracts were secured more smoothly than I had expected. Even as I stayed up late at night finishing proposals on my own, I felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The work I had once done silently for the sake of the company was now something I took responsibility for and took pride in as my own freedom. Meanwhile, chaos continued within Mitchell Systems. The loan agreements with the bank were put under review, and the board began to question the internal misconduct that had taken place. As the external audit progressed and the truth behind the contracts signed under my name, the destination of the $50,000 in spending, and the irregularities surrounding the loan began to come to light, the positions of my mother and sister began to crumble. Officially, my mother cited health issues as the reason for stepping back from executive leadership, but inside the company, voices were already rising to hold her accountable for the misuse of authority. Forgery of internal documents, unauthorized use of signatures, false loan applications. Each act was now being treated as a serious offense, potentially falling under criminal fraud or forgery of private documents, with the possibility of imprisonment now on the table. My sister Haley retained her title as director of sales, but several major clients had already requested a review of their contracts. The confident attitude she once carried had faded, and she continued to avoid making any formal statements regarding the audits and media coverage. The responsibility they have come to face goes far beyond internal disciplinary actions or a loss of trust. Criminal charges have become a very real possibility. And that was not a result of my actions but of their own choices. Then, just once, a short message arrived from my mother via my grandmother. I think I'm finally beginning to understand just how much you've carried all this time. It's taken a while. I hope someday I can say the word thank you to you and truly mean it. It wasn't an apology. But that was enough. We might never speak again, and nothing might change. But even so, I will keep moving forward with my life. I closed my laptop and wrapped both hands around my cup. I no longer work to prove anything to anyone. I work for myself. Quietly, yet with certainty. Not like a spark, but like a flame that continues to burn.